Good morning. I think every basketball fan around the world remembers a few key moments in basketball history. One, Hakeem Olajuwon's dream shake. Two, Charles Barkley elbowing and bullying the Angolan team at the 1992 Olympics. Three, Dikembe Mutombo's finger wag. And finally, more recently and on a more lighthearted note, Serge Ibaka's "How hungry are you?" These are key moments in basketball history that have Africans at the core. And I think everyone can accept and recognize that every generation of basketball greatness involves some element of Africans within it. I'm so happy today to be presenting a research that I conducted with three of my classmates, Frank, Sadar, and Gedalia, on the battle for Africa's sporting supremacy between football, soccer in America, and basketball, the sport that many might associate with the orange ball that gets bounced on a concrete floor. I'm a candidate of the MBA at the Wharton School and at the International Studies focusing on Africa at the Lauder Institute, and I'm very happy to have done this research today. Just a few quick rundown of what I'll talk to you about. I'll talk to you about who I am. I'll take you through a little bit about some key elements of basketball in Africa, and then I'll take you through some reasons why we have found football to be more supreme than basketball, and then we'll take a look ahead about what lies ahead and what we can expect. So first, as I said, I'm African, just like a particular Joel Embiid, who's a superstar player here for the Philadelphia 76ers. I'm from Botswana originally, and I came to Penn to pursue my studies. Secondly, I'm 6 feet tall, just like a particular superstar called Chris Paul. So I, in another universe, could have possibly played basketball professionally, but alas. And then I'm a resident of Philadelphia at this current moment, just like a particular superstar who used to stomp these grounds called Allen Iverson. And he, in fact, is the first superstar that I was aware of growing up who made basketball cool. I used to see Iverson 3 jerseys all the time growing up, and he made me fall in love with the game and recognize it for what it was. Just some clarifications to get out of the way. Firstly, Africa is a continent, right? It has 54 countries, and every single country is different in the way that it approaches things, different policies, different beliefs, and different people. But through this research, we have noticed that there's some specific themes and specific characteristics that we can draw general theories about, and that's what I'll talk to you about today. Don't be surprised if I cite specific countries, because those will be more anecdotal. But, just to draw a general theme. Please don't forget, Africa is a continent. Cool. Basketball in Africa. The Basketball Africa League the NBA announced a $1 billion basketball league investment into Africa in 2019. And it started in 2019, rather. And it involved the investment by the NBA into a professional league that was styled in the style of the UEFA Champions League in football in Europe. That will involve inter-country competition, and the best teams from those countries are competing in one competition to battle it out for whomever will be Africa's champion, essentially. So the outcome had dual outcome strategy. Firstly, was to build a basketball infrastructure on the continent, courts, players, and skill sets, coaches, etc. And then it also had intention of being an alternative product to the NBA in the US. I'm personally 6 hours or 7 hours ahead in Botswana, and I had to stay up late for NBA games. And so the Basketball Africa League wants to be an alternate watching alternative for people who might want to consume that in a time zone that is similar to theirs, or even players who want to play professionally but might not want to migrate from Africa to Europe or to the United States. We also noticed that basketball has been historically associated with a camp development model. And by this is short-term development programs that have been started by either teams or individuals who come to Africa and then host these 2 months or a couple of weeks and then fly back out. This is very different to what I'll talk about in football, and you'll keep this note as we go along. Let's talk about football. Firstly, football is what they call the beautiful game, right? Every child growing up knows about football, and football is probably one of the more accessible sports. It has low barriers to entry. All you need is clear ground, sometimes not even clear, and a ball, sometimes not even round, and just maybe bricks, sticks, and it can make it work. It's not as height selective. I'm 6 feet tall, and I barely scratch the surface of what an average NBA player would be in terms of height. So basketball is very height selective. Football has also played a strong role in social social movement. Kaufman and a sociologist from Harvard called Kaufman released a paper that talked about football's involvement, and how specific countries and specific regions adopt and diffuse sports, specifically developing countries that have a colonial history. And it's interesting to note that from that, there are two key takeaways. One, the role of the local elites in adopting that sport. And then secondly, the role of benevolent entrepreneurs and benevolent social movements in making the sport of the people. Football has done a great job at this. It was adopted by local elites, and every single boy child, girl child recognizes that football is their sport. And as I said, it's called the beautiful game. So it's played a strong role in liberating people in many countries. For example, there was a covert operation in South Africa that involved moving protesters, moving ANC members between countries disguised as football players traveling on a bus. And that is exactly how football has played, the kind of role football played in social movement. And there's very much an infrastructure spending that comes from governments to support this. Because building a stadium, you also build a track around it. And you're encouraging both football and track running. So there is some kind of government incentive to spend on that. And then there's an academic development model, which is where a country or a city or a team creates an academy that is long-standing as part of a school, as part of a team, and children can go there every single day. Unlike basketball, which has historically been associated with a camp model, where you start something for a short period of time and leave, football has had its roots and stays. So just some key differences. The Basketball Africa League has 174K compared to the Confederation of African Football. And notably, this is not just the CAF Champions League, it also involves the Africa Cup of Nations on the football side. Instagram followers, it dwarfs about 10%. And then the largest stadium capacity in Africa, indoor arena, is 20,000, compared to football, which has a 94,700 largest stadium capacity. The last final of the Basketball Africa League was held in the Kigali Arena, which has 10,000 seat capacity, compared to the last final of the CAF Champions League, which is the equivalent on a football space, which is held at the King Mohammed Stadium, which has 60,000 seater capacity. So you can see, even from a fan point of view, football has already captured people's imagination and has a capacity to hold and carry them through. So let's look ahead. What do we see and what can we notice? Right? You notice that? Okay. As I said, infrastructure spending. Countries have historically been associated with spending more on football than they have on basketball, even though we are seeing that trend sort of shifting. But I still think that the trend will follow, that more countries will spend on football and more teams will spend on football than they will on basketball. Because, as I said, and it has a dual use case. And then secondly, 11 players on a football team is more than 5 players on a basketball team. And so there is a higher caption rate with a football than with basketball. And we all know that states are very important in spending on infrastructure. Even in the US, stadiums are built by city governments and municipalities as opposed to private individuals. The business of sports, we have a higher salary rate in football than we do in basketball. And this is, as I said, because it has stronger roots. TV capacity is much better with football. TV record deals are much better in football than they are with basketball. And this trend will likely continue. And then finally, females are at the core part of what football looks like. And historically, we've seen that a lot of the time, the ladies' game would develop slowly after the gentlemen's game. But in basketball, we're seeing that the Basketball Africa League launched a few years ago with the males, and the ladies' team, there's a lot of rumors going around about the ladies' equivalent being launched. So it's great to see that basketball is doing exactly what football did, encouraging a great social movement capacity and making sure that the people who may otherwise be seen on the fringes of the game are involved from as early as possible. So, all that to say, we love basketball, but I think the beautiful game just has a certain place in Africans' heart, and it might take a generation or two before we can see basketball catching up from a revenue generation point of view or even fan following point of view. Thank you for your attention.